So those folks that could not make the meeting, we'll go ahead and share it with them. And hopefully you all can see my homepage. And it looks like a few more people might be logging on. But we'll go ahead and get started and people can kind of catch up as we move along. So thank you all for joining us today. When Mark and Kelly and I and Rusty and John Lord met, I guess it was only a month and a half ago. One of the things we were talking about was flying wild, and we just really aren't quite sure what to do with flying wild or how to move forward. And so one of the thoughts we had was to put it all out there to all of you, since you're in the field, to get your feedback and your input about how we can continue to move forward with flying wild. So let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, Mark, do you want to go ahead and start talking about the history of flying wild a little bit? And Mark, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Hey, Mark, are you there? He was there a second ago.
I can see him, but we can't hear you, Mark. Okay. Technical difficulties. Okay, he's holding his finger up.
Oh, okay.
Hear me at any point. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we can. Yep.
I don't know what happened, but hopefully that won't happen again. If it does, I'll have to pause and call in. All right. So Flying Wild was conceived of with folks that were very active in education about birds around 2000 and 2001. A lot of those folks were connected to International Migratory Bird Day, that effort, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, probably folks at NCTC and elsewhere, Partners in Flight. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Wildlife Foundation approached Council for Environmental Education to develop a program that would be similar to Project Wild, that had a track record and a history of success in, among other things, getting into schools. And so Council for Environmental Education went through the granting process and received that grant to develop it and launch it. And I came on in 2002 to help with that effort. So part of the early efforts were to create the vision and the purpose and the goals. So in this case, the program's purpose: engage middle school students in bird education efforts with the intent of encouraging increased environmental stewardship among youth, with special emphasis placed on creating a group that is readily adaptable to urban schools. So part of that discussion focused a lot on service learning and the best way to involve students in service learning projects as a way to connect the stewardship to the curriculum. Part of the vision was birds being a great hook for capturing students' interest, that birds are easily observed. There's easy access to places to see birds, and also access to community groups that are interested in birding and the conservation of birds. So a lot of community support for such an effort. Elena, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so I think okay, so here are the goals, and I'm not going to read these all, but I am going to just cover the bolded words, the key concepts: youth education, stewardship, service learning, teachers having resources, and a way to have schools work cooperatively with community organizations, and that way being bird festivals. Some common misconceptions about Flying Wild is that it's all about the bird festival and that's the primary focus. But actually, and historically, Flying Wild has been used most often in classrooms and non-formal settings with educators implementing activities to supplement curriculum in the same way that they would do with Project Wild. The festival's always been an option that many educators chose not to implement. So the largest proportion of users don't get involved with the festival, and they use them either in their classroom or in their out-of-school setting. Okay, next slide, please. This is just a quick timeline. 2002 was that original grant. It was at the end of 2002 where the first big planning meeting happened. 2003, there was a more focused task force with really key bird conservation organizations. And then 2004 is when the Council for Environmental Education started building the City Partner Network. I'll mention more about that in a moment. 2005, we debuted a bird festival, an educational bird festival at the National Science Teachers Association Conference. 2007 was the first bird education conference. There was another one in 2009 where folks from mostly the United States came together who are involved in educating about birds. 2008 was the launch of the Bird Education Network, a coalition of various organizations involved in bird conservation and education. And then 2017, of course, is when the program transferred to AFWA. Next slide, please. This is a clip from the front section of the guide, just to give you an idea of historically who were the big groups behind making Flying Wild possible, who gave the input, who helped advise on the content, and who helped us form a city partner network. And I say historically because while these groups we still consider to be sponsors and partners, there really hasn't been much interaction lately on Flying Wild, very little, if any, in recent years. ETAP, for example, the Environmental Education Training Partnership, was a funding program that is no longer in place. And Flying Wild currently is not getting any sponsorship funding, to my knowledge. So this is more history. Okay, so next slide. And then when we talk about who implements Flying Wild, then we start to talk about who's hosting it. That is, who's coordinating on the ground, who is training people, training facilitators to then take it to educators. And we have two categories of hosts for Flying Wild. One is the City Partner Network. And so this is a snapshot from a few years ago of what that city partner looked like. And it was the easiest one for me to acquire, so I used it. So it's probably a little bit different now, but it does give you an idea of the kinds of organizations and where they're located. Next slide, please. Actually, Elena, if you could back up just a moment, there was an important point I wanted to make about this connected to the history. The City Partner Network was launched for the purpose of a couple of reasons. One was that Council for Environmental Education had gotten the message from some of the Project Wild hosting organizations that their plate was too full, that they're not ready to take on another program. They encouraged CEE to find other hosts. Certainly not all of them, but some of them did. The idea of finding new hosting organizations was appealing to the funders because the idea was it would help diversify environmental education. It would be a way to connect more directly with community organizations in local areas. Okay, next slide, please. And then the other category of host would be those Project Wild hosting organizations, that is you all, that also implement Flying Wild. And so this, again, this list is about 1.5 to 2 years old now. So, if your organization or your state is not listed and you know that you have recently acquired Flying Wild guides or have done training and you're left off, sorry about that. But again, the idea is it gives you an idea that about 25 of the states are involved, that is 25 of the state Project Wild hosting organizations are involved with Flying Wild in some capacity. And that capacity varies quite a bit, from very little to a lot. Next.
Actually, Mark, that reminds me, I did create a little poll for folks to ask them a few questions. This might be a good time to launch that poll. So just 3 short questions there. Have you ever used any Flying Wild activities? Do you currently use Flying Wild? And does your funding limit your use of Flying Wild? So we have people are voting. We'll just give you all maybe another 15, 20 seconds to vote.
And you all should congratulate us, especially Elena, for making the poll thing work, because it took us a long time to get the bugs out.
Give 3 monkeys some technology and eventually we'll figure it out.
Just keep pushing buttons.
Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. We'll give people just 5 more seconds, but I think everyone that's responded is going to respond. And I'll go ahead and share the results. So the first question, have you ever used any Flying Wild activities? For those of you that are on the webinar right now, 15 or 79% of you said that you have. 3 people have not used Flying Wild, and then 1 person responded they use it on occasion. Do you currently use Flying Wild? The folks that are on the webinar, 13 responded that yes, they have. 6 have said they're currently not using it. And the last question is, excuse me, does your funding limit your use of Flying Wild? So 7 people responded yes. So that could be related to the PRDJ funds and how they're distributed and how your federal aid coordinator interprets the use of that funding. Okay. All right, thank you all. Appreciate that. It's good feedback to have. So Mark?
Yes. And it looks like there's about 20 states approximately represented on that poll that we just took.
Yes, okay.
So, okay. All right. One thing I wanted to say about Project Wild hosts that also implement Project Flying Wild, the option has always been there from the beginning for Project Wild coordinators to take on Flying Wild. And at the beginning of the program, the Council for Environmental Education was very active in recruiting city partner organizations, and in some areas or regions attempting to recruit them. We weren't always successful. But that wasn't, at the exclusion of the state coordinator. So the state Project Wild coordinator and their hosting or their organization has always been invited to. In some cases, it worked better just for the state coordinator to do that. And because the state coordinator took an early role with it, that was, in my opinion, a good benefit to the program in making that happen, even though we didn't get city partners there, and in some cases never really needed them. Okay, next slide, please. Kelly, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, so this slide is the sales and distribution of Flying Wild, and I put asterisks next to the 2016 and 2017 fiscal years. That was in 2017 is when we transitioned from being part of the Council for Environmental Education to part of AFWA. And as you know, the fiscal year with CEE was the July through June, and then the AFWA does the January through December. If you've been at the conference and everything, you've heard this all before. But what we were able to do was pull some of our inventory numbers from our warehouse to know how many guides we're sending out in that time frame. So you can see that from 2011, 2012 up through 2016, we were kind of trending upwards, which was encouraging because with our other guides over that time period, we were kind of trending downwards. So it was kind of a, pleasant thing to see that Flying Wild sales were doing well. But then you can see in 2017 that took kind of a big drop from maybe 2,800 or so down to maybe 1,800. So when we look at these graphs, we're always kind of speculating a little bit about why, what causes the change from year to year. So even though it looks like, well, it is a drop in revenue, another thing that we discussed when we all met together is we had also not been expending as much when it came to Flying Wild in the year 2017. At the end of 2016 is when Sarah Livesey, who was a consultant that many of you worked with, she worked on the Flying Wild program and was kind of more in touch with some of those city partners. So part of that could do with just less investment on our end in 2017. Another thing, in 2017, I took a look at some of the sales for Growing Up Wild and Aquatic Wild, and those went up that year. So that's another thing we talk about sometimes as well. Maybe if another guide, you buy a little bit more of one guide one year and then a little bit less of another guide that year. So as a lot of you guys know, you may have a fixed budget. So if you buy more Growing Up Wild, then that's going to mean you're going to buy less Aquatic Wild or Flying Wild. Another thing we kind of talked about is with the new guide coming out, that could be something that, and you can tell us in your decisions as you purchase guides, if you do purchase Flying Wild, kind of what impacts your decisions. But with the new guide coming out in early 2018, and us trying to promote that and a lot of buzz around that could be another reason why the guides have dropped. And as you can see, we're not through with the fiscal year, but it looks like it's going to be another drop this year. So we are kind of at this point, and Mark will go into this on the next slide, but we are kind of at this point where we're deciding, okay, what are we going to do with Flying Wild? So I'll let you take it to the next slide, Elena, and then Mark, you can talk about the considerations.
So Flying Wild is now 16 years old. So in some ways it's there's been some developments over the years. In recent years, not so much, but it is time to revisit some of these key considerations on content on one hand, and also how we implement it. Next slide, please. We're looking at questions about how the content is adjusted, how the distribution model is adjusted, what organizations continue to stay involved. Here are some possibilities that have been talked about, and you notice they'll have question marks at the end. Do we reorganize or remove the festival planning section? Is that a section that really is not why people are typically using the guide, and is it misleading? Is it distracting? Do we move it to the back of the guide and emphasize the core content, the activities. Another question is, do we change the types of activity categories in Flying Wild? Currently, we have activities that we refer to as teacher-led, volunteer-led, and student-led. Could we adjust them so they're just activities? Or maybe we have, the classic or traditional style activity, and then we have a subset of activities that are designed for students to take a lead in if they want to, more simplified, where they're the teacher. Another question, do we remove or replace the National Science Education Standards? And for that matter, should we be printing in the guide correlations to next generation science standards? Is there really space to do that justice with the greater complexity of next generation science standard? Do we change the target levels? Most educators that have used Flying Wild to date are pretty sure that they're elementary level, even though Flying Wild was originally conceived of as a middle school program. And we also have content in the guide that's best for high school level. So what do we do with that? One of the activities, we call it the student-led activity. Like many student-led activities, it's called Avian Antics, and the picture on the right is someone pretending to be a bird, inflating their pouches on their side of their neck to attract a mate. Brownie points for who can identify the species. Is it a quail? I'm not recalling. But so this is an example of an activity that has a very simple concept. It's fun. It can be done very quickly. Middle school students could teach it to others. It certainly raises awareness and starts to develop this idea and this concept of courtship behaviors and adaptations. But it is a very limited set of concepts. And it's the type of activity that we think it's used most often because, people, when they use it, they love it. And it's often used in places where they're not looking for something more complex, such as elementary school classrooms. So these are the questions, and this will launch us into some of our brainstorming. And so Elena, turning it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So we're getting close to the questions that we want you to talk about. I'm a little nervous that Mark gave me the kudos because I'm going to try and break you out into groups in just a minute where you're going to have an opportunity to talk with one another and brainstorm. So, one of the things, there are many different options of what we could do with Flying Wild. One thing we could do is just incorporate it with Project Wild. Take some of those activities and make the Project Wild guide bigger. We could change the training requirements. Maybe it only needs to be 3 hours. Maybe it needs to be 2 hours. Should we just have an online distribution? Should it be an online course that teachers take? Should it be an ebook? We'll even entertain the suggestion of just stop offering it. So what we're going to ask you to do again is think really big picture. The world is your oyster here. You have so many options, and really think the big picture questions are, what would compel you to use Project Wild? So what changes could we make? And then what should OFWA do with Flying Wild? Again, we put up some of these types of options, but there are lots of other options out there. You all are very creative folks. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unmute everybody. And I am going to but you're all going to be randomly assigned into breakout rooms, 23 participants. So there's 23 people on the phone. I think I'm going to make 5 rooms. And just so you know, I am going to duck in and out. And I use that phrase because I just read Carrie Wickstead's message, but I'm going to attempt to pop in and out of all of your groups. This is all theoretical. I've never done it before. So I'm going to go ahead and hopefully you're going to be parsed out into separate groups. All right, so here we go.
Seems like we didn't speak too soon after all. Those breakout meetings pretty much worked.
Oh, well, good.
At least ours did.
I know some people had some challenges.
Oh.
Okay, hopefully everybody will be coming back in 5 seconds.
Yep.
Back in the main room.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hello. The gang's all here.
That was so surreal.
That was really cool. It was.
Good job, Elena.
Ah, yay. I'm glad it worked for most people. I know it was a little awkward for some folks. And I'm glad we tried it. Perhaps we'll get some feedback from y'all and try and do it again. I feel like I'm talking like a Southerner after being in Alabama for 3 days.
Good for you.
Okay.
Well,
Woohoo! Welcome to the South.
Talking way too fast for someone else.
True. Okay, so breakout group one, Jerry, Mark, and was it Lucy? Do you all want to report on what you talked about?
I vote for Mark to do the reporting.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we had good audio with Lucy, and Jerry was able to type in comments. And so it sounds like in Wyoming there's a functioning partnership between the local city partner, Audubon of the Rockies, and Project Wild Wyoming. There's, for example, if someone wants to become a facilitator for Flying Wild or Project Wild in the state, they might be contacting slightly different people, but there's overlap in the networks. And I think that's common in a lot of states. There's openness to what AFWA thinks is, how AFWA would like to go forward with Flying Wild. I think in Wyoming, things are running smoothly and there's not an obvious need to make changes, but they're open to changes on the other hand as well. Jerry had brought up the point of opportunities to partner with local groups, and there are many bird groups involved with bird conservation and education about birds. There's in Jackson Hole, there's the American Wilderness School that has a class about birds that would be a good fit. So looking for those opportunities. And then Jerry also mentioned or asked about, what do other models look like PLT? How do they charge? And PLT, my experience with it is you pay by credit card and you can walk through a sequence of slides and a tutorial to get online training for some of their programming. There probably is more to that, but that's been my experience with that online environmental education model. And then also Jerry said there may be opportunities to team up with other bird conservation organizations for future distribution or sponsorship opportunities like Ducks Unlimited or Wild Turkey Federation.
And we also talked about U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with our wildlife refuges and their migratory bird celebrations, partnering with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, thank you, group one. Anything else from group one? All right. Group two, I think we had Hazel, Doyle, Rusty, Tanya, and from
Wisconsin.
Okay, great.
Emma, yes. Sorry,
Emma.
Mike. On this. Wisconsin.
With that group, just for a couple of us did not get into that group because we got put off into our own little meeting. So, we weren't in that discussion. We had a different discussion.
Okay.
That would have been Kiki and Doyle.
Oh, yeah, you were group 5. Yeah. Okay, does someone from group 2 want to report out what you talked about?
Yeah. So Wisconsin just took over Flying Wild a couple months ago. So I got some good advice from the rest of the group for me specifically that was useful, talking about how they currently use Flying Wild. We talked a little bit about whether some people have combined workshops. Some people have it as 6 hours on its own, and other people have done it with a combined where it's something like Project Wild on day 1 and then Flying Wild on day 2, some of which was like shortened hours instead of the full 6. And that seemed to be working for them. So some discussions maybe on what that looks like, the number of hours. It seemed to be there's a consensus that it is still useful to have as a separate guide. Hazel said that she liked one of the National Science Standards correlations online, which I think is, I get feedback from Project Wild and Aquatic Wild that's really useful. So yeah, having the standards be online so that they can kind of keep up with changes is really nice. We also talked a little bit about funding and having participants pay for the workshops, which is how Green Schools Network does it, and where our funding is coming from, and then the challenges then of getting the trying to keep the cost low so that cost isn't a barrier and so that you can get enough participants for a workshop. Yeah, I think those are the big things. Maybe there's something I left out. Anybody else, feel free to jump in with other things.
Anyone else from group 2? All right, thank you so much. All right, group 3, Amber, Anita, Ashlyn, Emily, and who's from Oklahoma?
Thank you.
Someone from group 3 want to report out?
Want to go ahead? Oh, Kim was with us too.
Okay, Kim.
We talked a lot about just numbers and like how, and recruitment, what each state was trying to do on recruitment. So we were bouncing a lot of ideas about each other, how we promote Wild and how we kind of attract the educators. Yeah, is it an individual standalone workshop or is it part of more of an advanced Project Wild workshop? So it's something with the experience attached to it. We also talked about the idea of, the festivals, which parts of the guide, who uses them in terms of festivals, or do they more use it as a supplement in their state for curriculum? And we also were bouncing ideas about how we could market it. Like I know that we talked about in Georgia, we have partnered with Cornell Lab a little bit. They have a Feathered Friends Ambassador program where they offer free bird feeders to anyone who talks about bird education. And so that's one thing that's been kind of attracting in our state to bring a few people in to the workshops. And then eventually we started talking about the hurricane stuff and making sure you buy pecans now. Okay. Pecans are gone.
Anyone else from group 3? Anything to add?
I just want to say I was thinking about, see, in Florida, what's key is our facilitators, empowering people to teach the workshops. And I was thinking the rehabbers, the bird rehabbers, maybe a group that would be excited about teaching Flying Wild. And also some of the other groups, I haven't really reached out too much, and I'm just wondering what the response would be with the Audubon groups around the state. And we have contacts there. And giving them a shortened facilitator training and letting them go with it. that's just something that came to mind. That I think that would be a good thing for us to try here in Florida, at least.
Okay. Great, thanks. Group 4. So it might have just been Kiki, no, Claire and Kelly.
So I guess we talked about ages and the fact that we've found there seems to appeal most of the upper elementary ages. I think like changes with next generation science standards put a lot of the actual material into that age group, but also because the program seems for us most popular with informal educators, and so almost all the people that have attended our workshops tend to be informal, and they really like it because the activities can be just drop in at their centres or put on during if they're having an Earth Day festival or other events, that so many of the activities work really well for that, and that's one of the big strengths of Flying Wild, is it appeals so much better to informal educators, whereas Project Wild, works best for a lot of the formal educators. So it opens up this big group of people that are looking for training and ideas to do at their centres. And we actually have probably more demand than we have resources to provide trainings because of people coming to it. They were talking about in Ohio how she is having trouble. Sarah was saying how she has trouble with, having partner groups and stuff like that. And we also, the people who are partnering with us aren't doing as much with it anymore. So we have the same problems in Maryland, that we haven't got enough partners, and we've been trying to build a new partner relationship with the local ornithological societies who are trying to bring bird education into schools and with school children ages. So it seems like that's a potential for us. But yeah, I kind of felt like really building on the idea of it being aimed to those more informal situations is the way to keep Flying Wild as like a really successful program, because it's offering something then that the other ones don't offer.
Okay, Kelly, anything else to add there?
No, I think Claire covered it. I kind of came into that group towards the end. So yeah, that's it. Thanks, Claire.
All righty. Last but not least, we have group 5. What did you all talk about?
Okay, that would be Kiki and Doyle.
Yes.
We talked about one of the things about it is the fact that it is right now it's set up as a 3-hour training. It's great to have a program that can be done in an in-service, like on an in-service day, but not take up the whole day. And that this one lends itself to that, where you could go into a school and train all the teachers at once, but not take up their entire day. So I've seen that as a very positive. It would be nice to put it into the same kind of format that the other, Project Wild and Aquatic Wild is already set up in, just so it has that familiarity to it. So that was one of the things we talked about. Let's see here, what else? It fits nicely with this program fits nicely with those workshops where if you do want to have more of an experience type workshop, it works nicely with that, because you can take them out and do a lot of birding with them, with the participants as you train them in the activities. And they're all, the activities end up being connected somewhat more. Let's see here. I like the fact that for some reason, there's a lot more groups in a state that seem to be focused on birds, such as Audubon groups. In Alabama here, we have the State Department of Conservation has set up several birding trails. And so it provides a way to connect locally with groups that are interested in that. I mean, if we do something about deer, you get hunters and, you know, you're not hitting the same kind of interest groups. And so this brings in a whole different connection to it. And let's see. And one of the things I like in it, that we've liked in, is that some of those activities are designed that youth can teach them with very little training. And I think that's a very important part of environmental education, is that being able to have children turn around and be able to teach it very simply themselves with a little guidance. And so that's one of those things that I think is a great plus to that, is that connection. And I think that's about all of them.
All right.
I think the thing that I was interested in is that it's a lot more depth on a smaller topic, and that's something that's unlike the rest of Wild. So that makes it a little different and special. So you wouldn't want to just roll it into the rest of Wild, because then that would dilute that extra depth that Flying Wild gives.
Okay. All right. Any other last comments from any of the groups? Okay, I noticed, so nobody said get rid of it, right? Okay, so we want to thank you all for your feedback and your time on this. This is very, very helpful for us as we decide how to go forward with Flying Wild. Since I've joined Project Wild, the focus has been so much on the K-12 terrestrial guide, and everything else is kind of fallen by the wayside, including Flying Wild. So, you know, we definitely appreciate some of your suggestions here on how we can better address this. Mark or Kelly, do you have anything to add?
I will add that one thing I had mentioned in a couple of our groups was that one option that we've kind of discussed a little bit as it has come up is that, you know, maybe there would be a way that we could provide like an online facilitator training in a way for places where there are bird groups that might want to offer Flying Wild workshops, but for whatever reason where they are, you know, maybe the coordinator isn't doing Flying Wild or can't get a Flying Wild facilitator training set up, then that would be maybe an option where they could get a little bit of orientation and training online to be able to provide workshops, and then we could connect them with the coordinator, you know, as far as paperwork and resources, but where attending an in-person Flying Wild facilitator training is there's no bandwidth or capacity for that to happen. Maybe that's something we could provide.
Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see. I see the comments about Ashlyn made a comment on whether the festival should be a bird festival or a nature festival. So I added that to group 3. And then Kiki wants to reiterate that she wants it to look like the other materials as well, so that there's consistency and commonality. All right, thank you all for your comments. As always, this is never the end of the discussion, and feel free to email myself or Mark or Kelly at any time when you have other thoughts about Flying Wild. We certainly do appreciate it. I want to be conscious of your time. We're a bit over, but I want to make sure you also see some of these updates that we have. Kelly, do you want to give a quick update about the conference?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so our conference planning is underway. Our conference team has met on the phone a few times, and we've got the agenda in pretty good shape. And next month, we'll be sending out kind of the first, email blast about the conference, including the draft agenda, what the registration prices will be. We're going to send out a little survey to kind of ask for, if you plan on attending, if you plan on having guests, if you plan on renting a car, all that good stuff, just so we can get a better guesstimate of our numbers. But yeah, we're going to have a great time in Montana, June 23rd through 27th. Mark your calendars. And we'll also send information out about stipend requests too. So stay tuned, November.
Yeah, as Kelly mentioned, we will have more information available on the coordinator's corner. We'll also send it out by email. But it's shaping up to be really good. We have some new presenters working with us this year. And that Tuesday field experience it's going to be phenomenal. It's going to be a long, long day though, but it'll be great. It'll be so much fun. I did send or put this in an email, but I want y'all to be aware that we're no longer supporting the Project Well Coordinators listserv. It now has a different email address. So it's pwcoordinators@fishwildlife.org. Okay, so just make sure you all know that. If you want to send an email out to the listserv, you have to use that email address. And I think the former one is going away probably October 31st. Our next webinar is going to be November 29th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And the focus is going to be on best practices for professional development. We're going to have a professor from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, talk with us about what he sees in the research about best practices for professional development. December 13th at 2:30 Eastern Time is our December webinar, and the focus of that one will be on a campaign called Making It Last. And that's coming out of the Education Outreach and Diversity Committee, specifically the communications work group. They've been working on creating some targeting messages that are available for state agencies to use. So we want to make sure you all have that information. Lastly, I want to point out or let you all know that the Safari Club International Foundation American Wilderness Leadership School, which is going on next summer, has scholarships available. I put a very long URL down there, but I'm also going to forward it to you all in an email. It's a week-long leadership school for educators, and so I'd recommend that you forward it out to your networks. It looks like an amazing time in Montana or Wyoming, I guess. Okay, Mark, Kelly, Rusty, did I miss
in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Wyoming, okay.
Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Okay. So
they've got a nice facility there that's quite amazing, and the school is quite amazing as well.
I know, I would go. The agenda looks pretty phenomenal. Okay, Mark or Kelly, Rusty, anything else?
Not for me.
Not for me.
Okay.
Not for me. Thank y'all, everybody, for all the work you're doing.
Yes, thank you all very much, and you'll be hearing from us soon. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
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 All right, Mark and Kelly, are you still there?
Yes.
Well, it looks like a couple people are still logging off, but oh, thank goodness that worked relatively well.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yes. I think people really liked it. Like, we could definitely, I think, do it again on a future monthly-ish webinar.
Yeah.
I think The challenges that I heard were that I think for people that called in, I think that was a little challenging. Like, for example, Doyle, I don't know if he called in and logged in on his computer, but so he got put into two rooms. I think that was very confusing for him.
That must have happened to Susan too, or that would be my guess because she said she was in 2 rooms.
Oh, right, because he was saying he could hear other people's conversations. That must have been distracting to him.
Ah, yeah, I think that must have been what happened with Susan. So that would be good to know if you call in and log in. That is something to consider. Okay.
And you don't want to call in and do computer audio. I'm just surprised they didn't get any feedback. That's why I'm not sure what exactly was going on there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, maybe like people that do call in, I'm wondering if like they were all clumped into the same group intentionally. I don't know if there were, say, only a few people, but that might not work so well.
It was nice that I could move Kelly out of one group and into another. Although I'm sorry, I did it a bit abruptly.
Yeah, it's okay. Oh, but I think I like though, like, aside from, that instance, I think Zoom has a lot of things set up, like how you get that warning and a little like dialogue box came up that said like, oh, we're about to go back to the big group. So nice.
I think the timing was good. I think they had about 15 minutes to talk with one another. And that was probably enough time.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Great job on setting up that presentation. I appreciate that, Mark.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you figured out the conference room. That's exciting. So I hope we get to use it again.
It is. And I did participate in one where NAAWE used the conference rooms, and it was I'm still recording. I'm going to stop recording.